Hello everyone. Today, I will recap the movie 12 Strong. The movie tells the story of the U.S. Army Special Forces, led by Captain Mitch Nelson, who were sent to Afghanistan right after the September 11th attacks. While the terrorists had up to 50,000 people, his team only had 12, not to mention the terrorists were equipped with heavy weapons. How did the battle unfold? Please watch today's recap. On September 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers of the U.S. were attacked by terrorists, killing nearly 3,000 people and injuring more than 10,000. On October 7th of the same year, the U.S. began military action against the Taliban. This elite team was comprised of 12 members of the Green Berets, who are also the main characters of this movie. The Green Berets are a special operations team of the U.S. Army specializing in reconnaissance and investigation. At that time, Captain Mitch Nelson was on family leave. He asked his commander for permission to assemble a team to engage the terrorists, but the commander thought Nelson was too young for this mission. Fortunately, the deputy captain, who had many years of experience, advised the commander that Nelson was a talented young man and that with his experience, he would definitely be able to do the job. Hearing this, the commander agreed to let their group go and clear the way. On October 16th, the 12 of them arrived at a military base on the Afghan border. There were many other teams waiting for orders as well. To act as the vanguard to attack terrorist groups, they need to convince the base commander. Although bin Laden had carried out attacks on the United States, the force behind him was the Taliban. If they could destroy the Taliban's power, the Taliban would no longer be able to attack the United States. Nelson believed that taking the city of Mazar would contribute to weakening bin Laden and the Taliban. However, the commander emphasized that this was only partly true. He asserted that they were not in charge of capturing the city. General Dostum would do that. He was the Afghan commander of the Northern Coalition forces. Furthermore, although General Dostum and the Taliban were enemies, his army was weaker than the Taliban's. Therefore, the mission of the 12 Special Forces was to build trust with General Dostum, join his militia, and cooperate to destroy the Taliban. Nelson said that he would complete the mission in 3 weeks. However, the commander said that this was impossible. Nelson explained that in November, snow would block all routes. If they did not capture Mazar within this time frame, they would have difficulty returning home. After Nelson accepted the mission, he introduced the current situation to the team members. General Dostum commanded a force of nearly 200 men and several militia organizations. The enemy was a terrorist group equipped with modern weapons, with a force of more than 50,000 people. The team members joked that it was great, 1 against 5,000, seeing enemies everywhere and not afraid of hitting teammates. However, that joke was not enough to ease the anxiety of the rest of the team. A team member asked Nelson if their flight path had been successfully tested. The team leader replied that they were the ones who tested it. After boarding the plane, they could not believe that their Chinook could only reach an altitude of 3,000 meters. The team wondered how it could be when the mountain peaks they flew over were over 3,000 meters high, and were worried that sandstorms and missiles would destroy their plane. Therefore, they thought they should fly at least above 6,000 meters. Nelson in charge announced that the actual altitude was 7,620 meters, while Nelson was still skeptical about the plane. He also wondered if the team members had enough oxygen. The pilot revealed that he had tried flying at this altitude, although during the test the co-pilot had hallucinated. He saw 2 oxygen masks behind him, but they were ineffective. The 3 planes took off towards the target city. During the flight, a sandstorm suddenly appeared. Some people could not bear it and vomited. Despite the difficulties, they successfully reached the designated point. Nelson ordered the team members to put on night vision goggles, prepare to lie in ambush, and wait for support from the spies. In front of them were 2 fully armed soldiers, making them suspect that these 2 were not comrades. As the 2 approached, they set up an ambush, but unexpectedly encountered a large group. Many people, holding guns and with very friendly faces, ran over. Nelson then shouted that they were all allies and in fact, it was just a misunderstanding. After meeting, the spy took them across several mountains, then to a militia area. Although they had a common enemy, they could not be considered comrades. Therefore, the militia did not have much sympathy for them. The spy also informed them that the Northern Alliance had disbanded, and now there were only 3 different militia groups. Dostum's group was one of these 3 groups, but these people did not like each other. Sometimes when they went to the battlefield, they would ignore the Taliban and fight each other head-on. Before leaving, the spy also told Nelson to be careful, because the Taliban had a high bounty on their heads. On the second day, gunshots rang out continuously. The task force was ready to fight, but when they went out, They realized that General Dostum was patrolling on horseback. Shooting into the air was actually their way of greeting. It was commendable for these people. Despite lacking ammunition, they still had the spirit to show off. Dostum did not welcome their arrival enthusiastically. He mistook the deputy captain for the commander, so he hugged the deputy captain again and led him into the house. At this time, both teams sat around the table. The atmosphere became very awkward and tense. Everyone held their guns in alert position. Captain Nelson took out the prepared bottle of wine to give to Dostum. Seeing that Captain Nelson was shallow and young, Dostum asked why a young man was talking to him. Immediately, both sides pointed their guns at each other. Thanks to the advice of Nelson and Dostum, the situation was temporarily calmed down. Dostum asked Nelson why the people following him had the eyes of assassins and thought that these were the necessary companions, while he looked like someone who was incapable of fighting. Nelson said that if Dostum wanted to see him kill, just lead him to the Taliban, he would prove it. Dostum decided to test to see how this young man could lead 11 experienced special forces. After going out, a funny incident happened again. How could the Taliban have modern tanks, and this old man still ride a horse? It was unbelievable. The group of 12 people, but only 6 horses, Nelson had to split into 2 groups to investigate. Dostum is a careful person. He wanted to keep the remaining people as hostages, fearing that they were spies. In a nearby village, a terrorist leader captured some civilians, including 3 children. He wiped away his tears, comforted the children, and asked which animal had the longest neck. The child tremblingly answered giraffe. He asked the child again how giraffe was written in English. The child answered honestly and was praised. Then he asked the second child how much 15 times 8 was. The child did not dare to answer. The third child answered 120. The leader praised her for her good answer. Then he tore off the head scarf of the teacher who was kneeling in front of the children and shot her dead. The rebels cheered, because he had a rule that under his jurisdiction, girls over 8 years old were not allowed to go to school. Meanwhile, General Dostum took Captain Nelson across the mountains. That afternoon, they arrived at Kobaki Cave. The terrain was high, causing their communication equipment to be interrupted. The team members were worried that the old general might be playing a prank on them. At this time, Dostum came out of the cave and announced that they would take revenge on the Taliban the next day. The next morning, they arrived at a Taliban-occupied village, 45 kilometers south of Mazar. After observing from a distance, Dostum told Nelson to inform the US military to blow up the place. Nelson thought that the distance was too far, and bombing by plane would not be accurate, but Dostum was worried that if he got too close and an American was shot dead, the US government would retreat, and Dostum would definitely lose. Nelson had no choice, and then he immediately reported the coordinates to the base. The fighter planes were always waiting for orders and quickly dropped bombs on the crowd. Dostum's men were celebrating when they saw the bombs explode, but Nelson was too far from the target. The bombing coordinates were wrong, causing the bombs to miss all the enemies. Frustrated, Nelson did not want to talk to Dostum anymore. He decided to move closer to obtain the exact coordinates. Dostum, worried for Nelson's safety, sent someone to support him. While reporting the coordinates for the second time, the terrorist group suddenly attacked. Fortunately, Nelson had a rock blocking the way in front of him. Below, the terrorists were fully armed and seemed ready to confront anyone. Thankfully, due to the efforts of many people, the location of the terrorist group was accurately determined. The bombers turned back, and thanks to the correct coordinates, they hit the target, causing serious losses to the Taliban. Nelson wanted to continue capturing the next base, but Dostum refused to allow it. The next village was Dostum's former territory, and he still had relatives there. Having witnessed the firepower of the American army, he hoped his relatives could escape. At that moment, the base dropped a supply box for the group of 12 soldiers, but it was robbed by the locals, who then sold it back to the American soldiers. A boy kept following Ben, even bothering him while he urinated. Ben felt uncomfortable and reported it to the deputy captain. With his vast experience, the deputy captain explained that if one of them was killed, Dostum would execute the person he deemed responsible along with their entire family. This made Ben sympathize with the poor boy, and he immediately took out a lollipop and offered it to him as an apology. It should be noted that in a place like Afghanistan, a lollipop was considered an extremely luxurious item. The US military deemed this raid fruitless, so they sent another task force to negotiate with a different warlord. The next day, at dawn, Dostum and Nelson's group gathered on top of the mountain. A boy greeted Nelson with respect, and he smiled back at him. Nelson asked Dostum why he was riding horses today, as the sound of bombs could scare them and cause them to run away. Dostum replied that the horses recognized it was an American bomb and therefore wouldn't panic. Nelson wondered how the horses could tell the bomb was American. Dostum and Nelson then used firepower to create a second explosion, causing the Taliban to panic and flee. Dostum ordered his entire army to advance, taking advantage of the chaos to attack. Some Taliban fighters raised their guns and surrendered, but Dostum killed them on the spot. He then sent his soldiers and horses into the villages, intending to eliminate all the terrorists. As Nelson stood on the mountain and looked down, he saw that the enemy had tanks to support them. He immediately called for air support, but was informed that the planes could not assist them. Consequently, the special forces rushed down to prevent Dostum's army from charging into a trap. Thanks to Nelson's timely intervention, Dostum was able to save his life. As the support team was leaving, Nelson saw the body of the boy who had greeted him earlier. There was little time to grieve, so they quickly retreated, although Dostum still lost part of his troops. Evening, Dostum explained that the Taliban transported weapons through the Tangi Pass, the only route into the city of Mazar. He knew their supply route, but did not anticipate their weapons. That night, Nelson contacted his deputy, announcing that the entire squad would assemble to prepare for the next attack. The deputy was also old and could not endure riding a horse. Dostum shook his head when he saw this. On the third day, Nelson organized another attack. Unexpectedly, the rebels were extremely cunning, hiding inside and intending to snipe from the bushes. They didn't even allow the slightest noise to escape. Nelson was completely unaware of the approaching danger. Although the deputy commander above had observed everything, he had not yet reported it, which caught the army by surprise. As the main character, Nelson escaped from the dangerous situation and hid behind a wall to return fire. Dostum rushed forward recklessly. He did not want to miss such a good opportunity. Nelson understood that he could not abandon Dostum, so he ordered the team to continue supporting him. During the fierce fighting, Nelson picked up a grenade and threw it. Despite the difficult situation, the rebels were still determined not to surrender. With the support of snipers above, Dostum's army continued to advance strongly. Meanwhile, armed only with an M4, Nelson bravely fought through the rain of bombs and bullets. Dostum then picked up an anti-tank gun and fired directly at the Taliban's firepower, creating an opportunity for the entire group to leave the battlefield safely. Nelson finally succeeded in capturing the village. He joked with Dostum, saying that if he continued to follow him closely, he probably wouldn't live long. Dostum recalled the time when he was in charge of this place, when all the children were educated and had enough food. Their next target was the terrorist group's headquarters, but to attack it, they had to pass through a narrow mountain path that was vulnerable to ambushes. On the 16th day, they destroyed several outposts on Tangi Pass. The road to Mazar was not far away. At this time, the deputy captain informed him that another special forces team had contacted Lord Atta, one of General Dostum's rivals, and was on its way there. Nelson reported this to Dostum, who was furious because he didn't want to be a tool of another lord. Therefore, he decided to end the cooperation and leave immediately. The 12 Special Forces operatives could only rely on their own abilities to complete the mission. Otherwise, the terrorists would continue to attack the United States. The team leader divided the Special Forces into small groups to lie in ambush in a high canyon. While the team leader and another member were on their way to an observation point, they were discovered by a terrorist scout. Luckily, a sniper on the southern flank aimed at the scout's position, adjusted his aim to the left, and took an accurate shot, killing the enemy. At this time, Charlie's squad on the northern flank arrived and set up a radio station to communicate with the bombers. When everyone was in position, a 1-on-5,000 battle was about to take place. All the elite forces of the Taliban were present in that canyon. The team leader ordered a laser scan to determine the coordinates of the terrorists, and then informed the plane bomber accurately. The continuous bombing by the Air Force made the canyon a dangerous place. After the first attack, the observers of the Special Forces continued to search for targets. Unexpectedly, a group of terrorists appeared in front of the deputy captain. Some of them raised white flags. The Special Forces did not know whether they wanted to surrender or attack. They could only repeatedly warn them to stop and not advance. The two sides did not speak the same language, and the situation was becoming tense as the enemy got closer. The enemy was very numerous, as if they were about to surround them. However, the enemy did not take any drastic action, so the Eastern Special Forces became negligent and let their guard down. At this moment, a terrorist detonated a bomb attached to his body. The Eastern Special Forces were injured, and when they regained consciousness, the deputy captain was seriously wounded. The members immediately called for an ambulance to take the deputy captain back. the observation posts of the special forces may have been discovered by the enemy. Both the southern and northern flanks were being bombarded. The antennas communicating with the bombers were destroyed. A brave team member ran to pick up the antenna and noticed the presence of a Soviet 122mm self-propelled multiple rocket launcher. After a while, contact was finally re-established. In a moment of danger, Dostum brought his troops back to support Nelson. However, Nelson was under fire from the artillery, with 40 rounds fired in succession, causing heavy damage. If he could not destroy the artillery, the terrorist leader could easily escape. Nelson decided to take advantage of the enemy's reloading time to attack head-on. Although Nelson tried to attack vigorously, the Taliban were still as numerous as ants. The fired bullets did not have much effect. Meanwhile, the rebel leader ordered his comrades to load the artillery, confident in their numerical superiority. The crew felt panicked by the enemy's aggression, and they called in bombers for support. However, because the target was too close, the aircraft could endanger their own crew. Nelson realized the weakness of the artillery was that it could only fire 40 rounds at a time, and the enemy needed time to reload. If they could attack while the enemy was reloading, they would have a great chance. When the situation became extremely tense, Nelson quickly led the charge forward. The main forces followed, entering the battle. They realized that this could lead to heavy casualties, but they only had about 2 minutes to act. Nelson saw the opportunity. He took his gun and rode his horse into the area with strong enemy fire. His comrades and militia followed closely behind. They were fearless, full of enthusiasm to attack and completely destroy the enemy. A member of the team saw the enemy vehicle charging towards him and fired a shot, causing the other vehicle to flip over. At this time, the cannon was fully loaded again and launched a series of attacks, but could not be effective due to the close distance and quickly ran out of ammunition. When Nelson gave the order to prepare to destroy the cannon, he was suddenly hit by an explosion and fell to the ground in a dazed state. The enemy intended to attack him by surprise, but unexpectedly was attacked back. This time, the Taliban had no way back. Dostum had led his troops deep into the area, while the gunboat was still unloaded. The terrorists immediately sent a tank forward to block the way, causing the militia to fail. Unfortunately, the terrorists underestimated Nelson, and with just a few shots, he took down the mortar man. They quickly approached the two guns. A suicide bomber threw a grenade, but fortunately, Nelson avoided it. Seeing that the situation was not good, the Taliban leader immediately fled. While fleeing, he drove his car into his own bomb nest, and the car could not continue moving. The leader was killed by Dostum. Nelson announced that the group had won a great victory. Nelson told his deputy how he wanted to return. They immediately put him on the ambulance helicopter and left. However, it was not over yet. Another general had arrived in Mazar City earlier, so General Dostum had to come to seek justice. Everyone thought there would be a bloody war, but the reality was different. Dostum shook hands with his enemy, ceding control of the city to General Atta. Nelson praised Dostum for making the right decision, but Dostum replied that there was no right choice there, and that Afghanistan was the place where many empires had been buried. Today you may be friends, but tomorrow you may be enemies. Just wait, the United States will also become a new power here. If you withdraw, it is cowardly, but if you stay, you will become enemies. But it doesn't matter, you will always be my brothers. The story ends here. These 12 special forces are a typical example of overcoming difficulties in reality. During the mission, they were imprisoned for many days and faced countless challenges before safely withdrawing. Many military experts believe that a military operation usually takes about 2 years to complete. However, the special forces in this movie carried out the mission in just 3 weeks with excellent results. The general character in the movie is actually Dostum, who became the Vice President of Afghanistan in 2014. He has also been a close friend of Nelson since 2012. At the #1 building of the World Trade Center, there is a statue of a Green Beret riding a horse. Indeed, in a historical context, heroes appear. No one wants war, and the most disadvantaged people are often innocent civilians. If you liked the video, give me a like and leave a comment about this movie. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the latest movie recap. See you again